Aluminum is one of the most integral metals for the production of materials. Aluminum is employed in every major industry from transportation to architecture to technology and computers and to consumer goods. Aluminum exists in many commercial products that humans use on a daily basis such as cans, foils, kitchen utensils, window frames, beer kegs, and airplane parts. Some of its most important properties include having a high resistance to corrosion, being lightweight but durable, being easily malleable, and being a good conductor. Aluminum is much cheaper, more sustainable, and a better conductor than many of its alternatives like copper. Aluminum is one of the most sustainable products when used efficiently. Aluminum is an indefinitely recyclable material, and it takes 95% less energy to produce recycled aluminum than primary production. While sustainable use of aluminum is very achievable, there are detrimental effects from both aluminum itself and its extraction. The largest environmental ramifications result from the mining for the aluminum ore, bauxite. This process is very energy intensive and disruptive to the landscape, ecology, and indigenous people. In this documentary, we will illustrate these devastating implications. In order to understand the environmental implications, we must first take a look at where bauxite, the ore of aluminum, is localized. The greatest bauxite concentrations are in Australia, Central and South America, West Africa, Jamaica, and Guinea. The U.S. is the largest importer of aluminum with $8.16 billion of aluminum imported yearly. Why are these regions so principal to bauxite formation?
Hi everyone, I'm a geoscientist. Here's my office. I work here every day and I'm very happy to answer your question. You see, bauxite is a very unique ore. There is a misconception that it is a mineral ore, but it actually is classified as a rock because it is made up of multiple minerals. Bauxite does not contain any pure aluminum, but rather precursors called aluminum oxides. There are two classifications of bauxite: laterite bauxite and coarse bauxite. Bauxite has favorable conditions of formation in tropical climates where there are highly precipitations and increased weathering and leaching. Tropical regions are where 90% of bauxite is variable.
But with so much bauxite being mined, a question to ask is, just how disruptive can this be to the environment?
Yeah, so here in Australia, we mine through a process called open cut mining, otherwise known as open pit mining or open cast mining. In the first process, we remove the overburden. Overburden is the rock above the ore that must be stripped away in order to gain access to the resource below. Our goal is to extract the smallest amount of material from the earth while gaining the greatest return on investment. Now, does this always happen? No, but I like to think that we make our greatest effort. The process begins with bulldozers coming in and excavating any surface material. This includes clearing all vegetation so that the upper layers of the soil are exposed. Next, we drill large diameter holes into the earth. Afterwards, we often blast the rocks with explosive ammonium nitrate to clear large rocks and debris. Finally, we load and haul away any remaining debris. Hauling and digging for more ore usually occurs with hydraulic shovels. Oftentimes, after we finish mining, the soil must be replaced so that the vegetation is able to recover. Some poor countries have weaker policies regarding open pit mining, so this isn't always accomplished. And this is where our bauxite gets refined to aluminum. Aluminum doesn't actually exist in nature in its pure form, so we have to convert it to aluminum from bauxite in a series of chemical reactions called the Bayer process. Bauxite goes through four main stages in the Bayer process: digestion, clarification, precipitation, and calcination. Bauxite contains aluminum trihydrate. And in the first stage, we must convert this to a precursor of aluminum called alumina. Depending on the region the bauxite was extracted from, it can have different compositions of the oxygenated aluminum. This means that some digestions occur at higher temperatures and others occur at lower. From this, we obtain the final product, a white powder called alumina, which is a precursor for aluminum.
Now, once the guerrilla miners get some of that white powder, good stuff, we can go into the next stage of the aluminum refinement process called the Hall-Héroult process, where the true energy heavy lifting is done and alumina is turned into your precious aluminum. Fortunately, unlike the mining gorilla that they invited before me, I am a chemistry professor, or at least I used to be before I lost my tenure in an incident involving an uncontained isopropanol reaction that incinerated the better half of the department. Apparently my presence wasn't appreciated after that, but you know, you have to say that this at least is a little bit fun, right? Sorry, had to have a little bit more fire before I continued, but I digress. Now, where was I? Right, aluminum, this stuff. Now, the Hall-Héroult process is an electrolytic reaction. Alumina chemical formula Al2O3 is put into a solution of molten cryolite formula Na3AlF6, so you're keeping track, with various other salts to lower its melting point and increase its conductivity. Now, how much is that melting point actually lower? Well, usually aluminum melts at about, balmy 2000 degrees Celsius, which can melt steel beams. But with our buddy cryolites, remember the formula, you'll be quizzed on it later, it can bring the melting point down to about 1000 degrees Celsius, which is still a little bit warmer than your average vacation in Hawaii, I would say, but at the very least, it won't melt steel beams anymore, which is good because guess what? We use a steel vat to hold our reaction. And the vat is actually embedded with a carbon cathode array that's used in conjunction with an array of sacrificial graphite anode rods. Now, when electricity is passed through the system, the magical process of electrolysis actually begins. Normally in this setup, we've got oxygen that's negatively charged collecting at the sacrificial graphite anode that also forms carbon dioxide and carbon monoxide, while our precious aluminum is created at the cathode. Time for a practical demonstration now, shall we? No. So here I'll demonstrate the basics of electrolysis. Now for aluminum, electrolysis separates oxygen from aluminum. You know what else can get separated from its oxygen? I'll give you 1 second to answer. 1. All right, time's up. It's water, formula H2O, and I've got a glass of the good stuff right here. Now, if you separate the oxygen from water through the magics of electrolysis, you're left with hydrogen, the stuff they stuck in the Hindenburg to make it float before all the H2 made it go up in a puff of smoke, literally. As you may know, all of that hydrogen had actually contributed to the fireball since it's super flammable. Now for a control, I'll show you that this water is in fact not flammable. Wait, hold on, that's not supposed to happen. But the laws of physics suddenly changed while I was out last night. Wait, no, that's my vodka, fuck! No. It's been real hard since I lost my tenure. I lost my job. I wasn't invited to anything anymore. Turning the department chair into crisp probably had something to do with it. And on top of that, soon after Susie left me and she took the kids. I'm gonna go cry now. So now that I actually have salt water here and am sober, I have the actual demonstration with me, which is this. So normally water is not that conductive, so I've juiced it up with some table salt to make it more electrically conductive to help along the electrolysis. Now the red, which is the anode, should collect the oxygen in the water and break down the sacrificial graphite, while the black, which should be the cathode, will be evolving hydrogen gas in this case instead of molten aluminum. Also, because hydrogen and oxygen is in a 2-to-1 ratio, we should see a bit more hydrogen formed than oxygen. Now, also because I use table salts, which is sodium chloride, NaCl, the electrolysis will also spontaneously generate some chlorine gas, aka the gas some people use to commit a war crime or two, but no biggie. So let's do this. Do you guys see anything? It's making bubbles. I don't know if you can see the bubbles. Can you see the bubbles? Here, I'll prove to you that it's electrically active, right? Oh dear. All right, I guess I won't anymore. But, there you go. Just a 12-volt lead acid battery hooked up in blammo, electrolysis, and also some smoke. Now, that's not too fun because we can't collect our hydrogen. So how about instead we use this? Yeah, that's right. Now, it's a little bit ironic because I'm actually using an aluminum sacrificial anode that gets turned back into alumina to electrolyze the water, which is the opposite of the Hall-Héroult process. But whatever, demonstrations are demonstrations. And also for our cathode, we have our pencil lead graphite, graciously donated to me by one of my students. No, this bottle is a little bit bigger than the last one, right? Okay, that'll work.
Of bauxite and how bauxite is mined and processed into aluminum, it is time to explore the environmental consequences. Fertile soil is one of the most essential elements of a healthy ecosystem. It provides nutrients to plants that many organisms rely on for a habitat and source of food. During the open pit mining process, the operators have to strip soil on the top and leave subsoil, which leaves subsoil and slag, which causes soil to become hard, compact, and lacking of moisture and organic nutrients. Even when the soil is replaced afterwards, open pit mining causes shallow soil and lower fertility, resulting in poor quality and recovery of vegetation. Healthy soil is characterized as having high concentration of minerals, organic carbon, and deeper depth. When the soil is excavated and replaced, many of these important nutrients that promote plant growth are lost. Additionally, the soil is oftentimes not restored to its original depth, which hinders the growth of many deep-rooted plants. A sudden increase in the ground temperature from mining can also alter both physical and chemical properties of the surface soil. This results in soil depletion and difficulty of plant growth. Open pit mining introduces contaminants into the soil, discourages plant growth, and is toxic to organisms as well. Increases in concentrations of heavy metals disturbs metabolic processes of microbes in the soil. The decrease of microbe activity can further cause the soil to become deprived of nutrients and lead to increases in acidity. Consequently, a lack of plant growth decreases the presence of buffer zones, which can lead to increased runoff during heavy rainfall. As a result, these very same contaminants from the soil enter streams, subjecting marine organisms to toxic conditions, and perhaps even entering the water we drink. Animals that stay at the bottom of the food chain and live near mining areas consume food covered with heavy metals. These animals are consumed by ones above them in the food chain. And in bioaccumulation, the toxic metals will move gradually from consumer to the top of the food chain through this feeding relationship. Noise, vibration, and terrestrial damage from mining leads to the migration and death of various animals as well. In addition to pollution to the soil and water, open pit mining also has consequences on the air quality. The drilling, hauling, clearage, and blasting increases the presence of particulate matter in the air. Particulate matter can either be coarse or fine. Coarse particulate matter is less concerning because it can be coughed out. However, fine particulate matter can get lodged deeply in the alveoli and lead to cardiovascular and respiratory problems. Dust can also have chemical reactions within the air to affect the local climate by reflecting or absorbing radiation. Dust from bauxite mining is primarily composed of iron oxide and aluminum precursors, among other things. Bauxite dust is also red in color and contaminates food, clothes, water, and vegetation. The red mud waste that the Bayer process produces has extremely toxic properties. It contains toxic metals and has a very high alkalinity. When this waste interacts with the soil, it can be highly corrosive. Research of the Bayer process has indicated the presence of naturally occurring radioactive byproducts. Commonly occurring byproducts include uranium, thorium, and radium. The occurrence of radioactive decay can cause accumulation and contamination of the environment, and perhaps the water sources as well.
This is what made the destruction of our land feel like a deep hole was being drilled into our hearts with every noise we heard coming from the bauxite mines. I remember the day when the miners started to drilling. The screeches was air purring. The smell made my stomach churn. And dust was suffocating. I witnessed our land being surfaced day by day. And one day, they made us all relocate because they have identified the deposits of bauxite beneath us. The dust that ran into the river caused our streams to turn red. We like to say that they run red with the blood from our ancestors, which is on the hands of the miners. Centuries of my people's history are gone. Now I cannot return to my native land without feeling an emptiness inside.
Australia has the largest industry for bauxite mining in the world, and Sam's story is just one of the many examples of how people's lives can be altered by these mines. However, for Sam and the other inhabitants of Australia, the bad news does not end there. Nurse Sophia of Malaysia recounts the particularly dire health consequences for the people living in the area.
I remember when the mines were first being constructed, many of them were scattered within the communities in the area without clearly defined zones. It was clear that the government was just looking for ways to exploit the land for money and did not care about the people living in the community. The first noticeable difference from the mines was a difference in air quality and the loud noises from drilling. They cleared a lot of the soil and unwanted trees, and then when they started mining, it started to kick up a lot of dust. The children who used to play soccer out in the streets no longer would have a desire, as the loud noises and dust would hurt their eyes and ears. People in the area would come into the clinic and complain of headaches caused by the constant noise. In some cases, patients would have psychological problems caused by the high stress levels and anxiety caused by the commotion. The whole stretch of road along Kuantan Port was tinted red, along with many of the houses and clothes of the people I saw living in the area. Many parents expressed concern about their children attending school during this time, as their commute exposed them to God knows what. People will often show up to our clinic complaining of irritation to their eyes and trouble breathing due to particulates that were scattered in the air from drilling. Some primary symptoms we look for to diagnose iron oxide or aluminum precursor exposure are irritation and burning of the eyes, nose, and skin. In addition to the land being red, the water was not safe either, as many of the local streams gained a nasty red color as well. Monsoon season was the worst because this water would flood the streets and expose people to high levels of toxicity. In turn, it has polluted the drinking water. As you can imagine, consuming these heavy metals will have potentially life-threatening long-term consequences. Overall, though bauxite mining has become a good source of income for many of the low-income workers here, as a healthcare worker, I feel that regulations need to be placed to advocate and enforce the safety and health of the workers and the well-being of the local people.
With the mining and refining of bauxite being both environmentally damaging and energetically costly, there is an urgent need to make the process more sustainable. Some of the existing international policies and organizations have been moderately successful, but their membership is voluntary. One of the organizations that exists to regulate bauxite mining is the Intergovernmental Forum on Mining, Minerals, Metals, and Sustainable Development, or IGF. This organization is responsible for reporting data and providing mining companies with a detailed framework to assure that the negative impacts are as limited as possible and the financial benefits are shared appropriately. As part of this agency's framework, it holds mining companies accountable through its mining policy framework. This is a framework that they have established to define a set of clear objectives that govern mining activities. While this framework is quite extensive and provides governments with specific guidelines to follow, this framework is difficult to enforce upon countries that are not members of the IGF. This framework has 6 pillars outlining its objectives: legal and policy of environment, financial benefit optimization, socio-economic benefit optimization, environmental management, mine closure and post-mining transitions, and artisanal and small-scale mining. Currently, 75 nations are committed to this agreement. However, the enforcement of these parameters is very variable depending on the development and resources of the country. Another organization called the International Institute of Sustainable Development helped to oversee the creation of the Model Mining Development Agreement. This agreement is geared mostly towards developing countries whose economy is greatly affected by environmental regulations. The agreement requires mining companies involved to outline the exact boundaries of the land they will use. Additionally, the agreement states that countries cannot override requirements for mining companies to obtain permits. Mining companies are required to submit extensive feasibility studies on the land before a single hole is even drilled. They must ensure the environmental impact is not too great, as well as the social and financial impact.
A non-governmental organization known as an NGO that has to do with the mining of bauxite is the International Aluminum Institute. The current members of this organization represent over 80% of the global bauxite, alumina, and aluminum production. Thus, companies engaged with this organization are quite influential. Their primary objectives are to increase the market for bauxite, encourage environmentally secure processes, collect statistical information, and communicate views on relevant policies. They have included in their organization the guidelines and goals to meet sustainable development of mines in order to promote environmental safety and avoid hazards to public health. Some objectives of the organization were successful, such as the effort to significantly reduce greenhouse gases produced. The organization also provides extensive data about the production, consumption, energy use, and environmental impact. The organization hopes to reduce point sources of emissions and transfer toxic compounds to be raw materials for other processes. The International Aluminum Institute also has exhibited an interest in understanding the consequences to human health of their process. Overall, this organization has one of the more positive influences on mining industries and provides a good foundation for more sustainable practices. So, the future is not completely bleak. While the intention is positive, it is poorly executed in some regards. Many of the goals highlighted in the documents have not had their framework fully developed. While many of the companies advocate for sustainability, there is still much work to be done if they are going to reach their sustainability goals.
While many of the policies and organizations that we have discussed would be greatly successful in combating environmental consequences, these policies need to be adopted by more countries. As stated earlier, these organizations and their frameworks have not been agreed upon by a large majority of countries. The first step to reduce the negative impacts of bauxite mining is to encourage more countries to adopt the philosophies of these organizations and enter the agreements. In order to accomplish this, governments should also be educated on how unsustainable mining practices can cause their land to be devalued. They need to realize that while mining is profitable, they cannot profit from the land if it is damaged beyond repair. Therefore, governments want to preserve the land to the best of their abilities and restore it after it is done being used. While many of the byproducts of the refinement process are extremely hazardous, there is actually use for some of this material. Treating red mud with cheap sulfur compounds can actually decrease the amount of toxic metals in the mud. A researcher from MIT was brilliantly able to use red mud's absorbent properties to capture other heavy metals. The sulfurized red mud has achieved high removal rates of toxic heavy metals in solution during lab studies. Treated red mud has been shown to have the possibility of leaching toxic compounds from wastewater, paper mill water, and coal plants. This research will need increased funding if it is ever to become a large-scale solution. It will also need increased research, and it is not fully understood whether the treated water can be released. Another solution to reduce bauxite mining pollutants is using an alternative means of production. Aluminum is one of the most sustainable materials that we use on a daily basis. When aluminum is recycled, it saves 95% of the energy required to make new aluminum. Moreover, the good news is that over 80% of the U.S. aluminum production today comes from secondary aluminum processes. Increasing aluminum recycling lowers the carbon impact and thus greenhouse gases. Recycling aluminum can reduce emissions required for transportation, refinement, mining, and purification. It can also reduce the need to obtain bauxite that disrupts the environment and affects the ecology and indigenous people inhabiting the land. In the case of aluminum, recycling is the most obvious and effective way to reduce red mud, particulate matter, soil pollution, and more caused by bauxite. However, despite this, global bauxite mining is still rising by a few percent each year. Thus, in order to drive down bauxite mining, incentivization to recycle aluminum is pivotal. Lastly, the companies also should have to consult with and compensate the indigenous people that are forced to relocate from their homes when bauxite mines need to be constructed. It is understandable that mining provides jobs to people, but the people whose lives are affected need to be taken into greater consideration. Settlements should be provided in advance, and assets needed to reestablish their normal lives should be supplied as well, such as important crops and livestock. Companies should also have to consult with indigenous communities in the area to help the miners understand the full range of social and environmental impacts. The mining company should also provide employment opportunities to interested natives in the area. People in the mining industry are human, and there should be ongoing support and discussion with the communities affected. The culture and history is invaluable, and intentionally effacing it is both ethically and morally irresponsible.